Long as I got shoes to put on my feet. Oh, look like we got some technical difficulties. So we're gonna pray right now. Kind and gracious Heavenly Father, please be with us, be with this broadcast, be with my brother Chuck, and whatever internets is going on over there.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. I was like, what in the world?
I was trying to tell you, man.
Oh,
Welcome. Good morning. We
what
are
up?
back.
What up, Chuck? Bam.
What up, Zig?
Oh man, you got the internets, right? You got the internets going on.
I told you, man. I was trying to tell you to stop. Don't start the broadcast. I don't know, man. This might be a
Got
run.
right. This is why we was telling what was it, old boy Pastor Kelly and his homeboy, you need the Ethernets.
Yeah, man.
You need an Ethernet cable.
Now when the location changes. But what up, y'all?
What's up, everybody?
Happy Sabbath to you. Good morning. We see you, Candace. What's up, everybody watching? Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully it's not too popcorny.
It ain't popcorn. It's very robotish.
Naturally.
Robotish. I think if you stay still, because the more you move,
yeah, man.
Because then that way, if you freeze, then it'll just like, hey, he just being still right now.
Lord, wasn't good, everybody.
Just be still.
But yeah, we are here. We are back. We got a good show for you. We got a lot to talk about, right, P?
We do got a lot to talk about, which is interesting because it seems like there's only one thing to talk about, but it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
It's a lot to unpack.
We're going to try to do it. Happy Sabbath, Chris. Good morning. We see you. Thanks for watching. But yeah, we're going to get into it. We got the George Floyd murderer convicted. We're going to get into it.
Yep.
We also got the additional police shootings and other shootings going around the country. We got local news that we want to get into and events as well. But before we start, we just want to kick it off with a word of prayer. Go ahead.
So, Heavenly Father, again, we ask that you bless us, bless our conversation so that we might bless others. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And be with this brother's internets.
They got me. They got me.
Yeah. You know what is funny? Like on a real funny thing. I thought about doing something different, and I can appreciate, your hair, right? Because when I thought about doing something different to my beard, I was like, man, if I do something different, we're gonna have to change the logo.
Yeah, man, we gotta keep the hair, man.
We put too much into it. I was like, I don't know what I'm like. No, I was like, no, took too much effort. So yeah, so this week, y'all. Well, actually, before we get into that, I think we should talk about the local family we had. What was it? We had a two family, the Sumter family. And so there's a GoFundMe. I'll put the link in the chat. But there's a GoFundMe for this family who lost so much just a couple days ago. So the Sumter family had a house fire. I know when I opened the link, all I saw was family with a house fire. And then as you read the story, the kids lost everything in the fire, including their mother. So, bro, like that kind of stuff, like get to me. Ever since, becoming married and having kids, stories like this, I'm usually like, I don't want to hear it. Just tell me what I need to do. So as I was reading, I was wholly expecting to just see a story about a house fire, but apparently they were the victims of arson.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, the fire claimed the mother of the two young children. So the husband is now a widow, and the kids are motherless. So definitely prayers help, but action is better. I know I definitely. So if the treasurer come looking for me, this is where my tithes is going. For I don't even know, man. For as long as this link stays alive, um, especially and it's local, right? So
Yeah.
this is a Detroit family. We want to definitely give our prayers to them, but also put some action behind our faith. I think about, and I know we've had conversations like this before, where it's like, how can you be made whole in a situation like this? And it's tragic, it's sad. I'm watered up just looking at it and thinking about it. So please give. They're more than halfway to their goal.
Mm-hmm.
They're also given through the through the Adventist portal.
Advent portal, yeah.
Yeah, so adventistgiving.org through the Conant Garden Church. So definitely prayers to those families, and I'm hoping that other people can support.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a donate as well. It's a terrible tragedy, especially just like you said, on top of losing all their physical items, they lost their mom and their wife, and that can't be replaced. We talk about things that can be replaced in life. It's like, yeah, get a new pair of shoes and get new clothes,
Right.
but that she can't be replaced, and it's such a tragedy and a loss. So definitely, prayers, go up for them, but also please donate as much as you can. We've seen God do miraculous things to people giving as well. So definitely, this will be a chance to help them, try to put some of the pieces back together. And, you can donate, like Pernell mentioned, through the Adventist Giving website or through the GoFundMe. And, yep, the links are coming. I see you, Candace. Appreciate it. And definitely take the time to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's similar, and I guess that's a you start thinking like, how do we get out of this? But then I think even like the Floyd family, we had the Chauvin trial, and it was a rumor. I don't know if this is confirmed that George Floyd's wife was the teacher of Dante. Right? Did you hear that?
I didn't hear that. I didn't know they were connected.
Yeah, and I was just kind of like, what? And so I don't know. I think that might have been just like one of those. I don't know. Like it could have been just one of those internet things to pull your heartstrings.
Right.
But yeah. So we had this trial this week, and so I think.
And the good news at first, right, is that he was found guilty of all the charges, right?
Well, yeah, I think there's a process to that. So I'm like, even before you get there, like he was found guilty. I think that's so everybody knows he was. The surprise was plot twist, guilty on all counts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Second degree murder, manslaughter, and then I think it was third degree murder.
It was second degree and third degree.
Yep, and then manslaughter. And so I think and people who are watching need to give us some feedback. I know initially when I got a text message from somebody said, "Hey, they're about the jury's about to deliberate." or the deliberations are about to be announced. And so, because I was working, and then somebody else sent me a text message like, "Hey, like, are you all right?" And then I got a text message like, "I got knots in my stomach." Then I got a text from somebody else was like, "I got knots in my stomach." And then I was like, "Well, I'm cool," like, because in my mind, I think I was already expecting the worst.
Right. I mean, there's been a precedent set where, at best case, you go to trial.
Right.
Don't get a conviction. It's just the best case. They're like, we'll charge this guy, and then there wasn't enough evidence, so he's free to go. I mean, it's been going on for how long? I mean, since since this. I can't even say since almost forever, right? Forever seems the wrong.
Black people been here.
Yeah, basically, since Black people get here. I mean, you saw the flip side of it with, or the same, not flip side, the same thing with Emmett Till, right? They had the trial. I think it was less than an hour. They were like, "Nah, these people ain't guilty of killing that boy." And that's been like, to me, that's like the precedent from there, going forward of the legal system, in the modern era, not being fair and just for Black people. And it's been, it was definitely that feeling. And we want to hear from you as well. What was your feeling this week when you were waiting for the verdict? I know for me, I purposely not watched any of the trial because I
didn't even.
It's not. In my mind, I was like, it doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter in the sense of, unless it ends in a conviction. I don't want to be so into it.
Which it wasn't guaranteed that it was going to reach a conviction.
Right. So when it was announced, it was a sigh of relief. It wasn't so much a celebration. It was just like, finally, like, this was the right thing was done. And, there was a lot of different reactions, though, from the other side, man. There was a lot of people who felt that.
But I think even before we get there, I think it's important to talk about the fact that you had this collective, anxiety, right? No matter whether you watched it or you did, because I didn't watch it either. And so whether you watched it or you didn't watch it, you still had this, there was this, as much as people would like to think that they were okay, everybody was anxious. Now, I definitely agree with everything you said before. I think in addition to that, we're talking about, because of things like Emmett Till and because of things like that just continue to perpetuate over time.
Right.
We all had this expectation. I mean, think about the Breonna Taylor case, right? Just recently, where the officers were charged and convicted or charged with shooting into somebody's house, but not killing her. And it was just kind of like, what? Like, reckless endangerment is what they were charged with.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, which is a misdemeanor. Right. It's just like, what are we talking about? And so then we have all these examples year after year. Trayvon Martin, all of it. Jonathan Crawford, all of it. And so then we get to this and we're like, now the world is watching and they're going to see what we, and it was like, and granted, like, I don't think like everybody had that thought, but that is definitely the truth of the matter, is that everybody was watching. And I think everyone had the same type of anxiety of at least thinking, we don't know what's going to happen. And that's sad, considering when the evidence, the truth is laid bare. And I think about that Dave Chappelle special, it's like, and to be honest, like, even now, like, as I'm thinking and speaking, it's hard for me to like control my words, right?
I see that, man. You a little bit there, brother. You trying to find the words.
And listen, I know we live, and I don't want to say nothing crazy, but the fact of the matter is that there is this thing called secondary trauma, right? And so it's not necessarily the fact that we have all experienced this thing, but we are all aware of this thing that happened, and it affects us. I posted something, to the Instagram. We all feel what we all feel. Like literally, we all feel what all other Black people feel in this moment.
Black telekinesis, right?
Right, that's what you call it. And then other people call it, post slavery syndrome, post traumatic slavery syndrome.
Right.
And this is an example of that, right? And so, we are constantly involved in so many things that touches every last one of us. And as much as people would like to think that they've not, and I was listening to NPR this week, and there was a story about this Kenyan family who said they had never experienced racism. And I thought, man, I remember when I used to think like that. And I think once your eyes are open and once you start to see, you start to reflect like, yeah, I have experienced it. I don't look for it, but then you start to realize like, man, these things do happen. And even if it didn't happen to me, I have to acknowledge that it happens to people that look like me.
Oh, for sure. I think that's what we're talking about, the shared experience. Even though I didn't experience, this, and I actually haven't experienced, this type of interaction with the police. Like I've had negative experience, but not to, that degree and that level. I can understand and relate. And even when I do get pulled over, I think I mentioned last week, like I got pulled over, like there's that anxiety that happens, and nothing. It wasn't a bad experience, but it's just that initial, like, oh man, what's about to go down is because of what's going on in our society today. And what's interesting, as I've seen in the comments, there's a lot of this feeling that even though we got a conviction, it doesn't mean anything, right? We're still waiting on the sentencing. There's no sign of relief yet, right?
No.
Nope. It's interesting with the sentencing. They're talking about that he could get a maximum of 40 years.
It could be, and that's the difference too. Like the sentencing part is all up to the judge,
right?
And so it's not a jury that's setting the right; it's the judge. And in my mind, the judge has already shown his hand. The judge,
his hand is.
And so because the judge made a statement about Maxine Waters and comments that she had made, which are nowhere near any of the comments made over the last 4 years from the previous administration. But he saw fit to acknowledge her comments and her comments alone, and say that her comments would give the defense an opportunity to appeal the case and have it thrown out. And I was just kind of like, what? Like, you're like, he's a judge. The judge is supposed to be impartial. But he's providing legal counsel from the bench. And this is the person that's supposed to be sentencing this man based on the crimes that he has been convicted of by a jury of his peers. And so that's one thing that definitely stuck out for me. So I don't trust the judge already. The second thing,
it's like a warning, to be honest.
Yeah, like it was kind of like it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I used to work at the courts. I used to be a probation officer. I feel like I won't be derogatory, but I was like, man, I feel like I've had so many jobs in my life. I used to deliver ice.
A long journey to become.
But I digress. So what is being done? I do not believe that justice has been served, because all that has happened is that he was convicted. And we know from the previous show that we talked about, like Vincent Chin, those men pled guilty, and the judge allowed them to walk and not serve any time. And so in this case, you got the same kind of situation where it's like you have a judge who's shown some bias, and then you go into what you were talking about. He's been charged with second degree, third degree, and manslaughter. The problem with those, I think that the second degree has a highest time limit of like 42 years.
I think it's just 40.
Or 40. It's like 40.
It's
like
40, 25, and 10.
Yeah, 40, 25, and 10. However, ... Here comes another plot twist. Those terms have to be served concurrently, not consecutively. So if it was served consecutively, he'd have to serve what 75 years in prison.
Yeah.
But because it's basically he's only charged. You could say he's only going to face a penalty for one thing.
Right. And, I see in the comments, we're talking about, the continued just variance of trauma. But Riley was talking about his own parents' trauma and experiencing that through in Mississippi. Can't go to restaurants. Sometimes when things are institutionalized, you don't recognize it.
Well, listen, we in Michigan, bro, and one of my colleagues, who is from Ypsi, she is not very much older than I am, and when she was younger, she was the first Black child to her elementary school.
Yeah,
like let that sink in. I'm 40 years old, and she is probably about maybe 10 years older than me. She was the first Black child to her elementary school. So we not too far off from what Brother Riley's talking about.
Right.
Her parents, there's a restaurant in that town. She asked her parents a couple years ago, how come we never been to this restaurant? And they said, well, when you were younger, they didn't serve Black people. And so we are not that removed from these experiences. And so when I hear people say things like things are different now, and we've advanced so far, I think it just looks different. And I think the difference is that we have more access. But in terms of, and I did a discussion this week, it's the difference between being welcomed into a space and being accepted into a space.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's been the history in the last, you could say, 50 years ago, where it went from, slavery to Jim Crow to just, covert racism. I mean, going from, saying you can't, a sign being up saying you can't eat here, to just redlining cities and saying you can't live here, right? Unofficially, right? So I think it's just, the virus of saying working through racism to continue on, even though legally on the books you can't do it. And when we talk about the court system, giving, Black people harder sentencing for similar crimes, giving Black people, not giving Black people jobs, even though they have the same credentials. There's all this types of, racism, and it's Brother Ben raised a good question. What are we going to do about it? When justice is being served, what are you going to do? There's, protesting going on. There's people showing up on the streets. What are they really doing? From a city hall voting standpoint, do we understand who our judges are? Right? You're talking about the judge, but do people on that ballot, do they take the time to really research all the judges when they say things like tough on crime? What do they really mean? What's the history of in the courts? But I don't think we take that extra initiative to do it. And from what's going on, I'm hoping with everything that's been going on, that people are really starting to take this seriously and not just look at one aspect, right? We talk about investing. We talk about money. You don't just have one thing. You don't just say, right? You do stocks, you do bonds, you do real estate, The same with this type of stuff. You don't just protest. Protesting can't help, but it's also voting. It's also going to town hall meetings, going to your city hall, going all these different events, being engaging, so that people know we have our voice matter, and we're going to use all of our resources to make sure that we don't have another George Floyd. That we don't have.
I think, and as you get a little bit more popcorny,
Oh,
the thing that I think is interesting is um, how ambitious, I'm going to say that word, how ambitious that I'm going to use some of our brother Victor's words, how ambitious the people of the dominant caste um, are to use and hold up people like Martin Luther King, right? When Martin Luther King showed not just that we could progress as a people, but also how we could progress in our thoughts and our actions, because towards the end of his life, he shifted. Right, there was a shift, and that shift that he made, we don't talk about very often. We kind of and we kind of tend to do the same thing with Jesus, right? We want this pacifist example to placate people, and you know, Dr. King talked about injustice. And then once his thoughts and decisions and actions started to shift towards economic injustice, because as Black people, we face racial injustice, but as a whole, there's a system of oppression happening to everyone at an economic level. And once he started to talk about economic injustice, where he talked to, I think, so one of his quotes, the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of both political and economic power. And I think a lot of the struggles of the society, right, is this tug of war battle of how much power, political and economic, the dominant caste is willing to give up. And so it ends up just being this tug of war. And so when they feel like it's slipping too much, then they tug and they pull real hard. That's where you see these anti-riot bills in Florida. You see these voter protection laws in Georgia. And again, it just continues to happen over and over again. And so that despite the fact that the dominant caste is declining in population, which would make them less of a majority, they are still considered the dominant caste based on the powers that they hold. And the power also includes the views that they continue to perpetuate throughout their group. It upsets me, right? How do we get to a place, how do we get to a place where I'm looking at this comment here. So if justice is not served, what are you doing? And I think about it biblically. Justice is mine, or vengeance is mine, thus says the Lord. And I think a lot of people are placated by, in my honest opinion, are kind of placated by their religious views. And so absolutely. And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that we absolutely lack this today. When even now, I don't think there's enough leadership in our churches. I don't think there's enough leadership in our neighborhoods. I don't think there's enough leadership from our political groups to give us, to guide some of that stuff that is happening. So it makes sense to me when we see riots happening, and even thinking about Dr. King and his quote about riots being the, what did he say? Riots is the language of the unheard. Without that guidance, without that structure provided by elders from our communities and people with power and authority, how do we get to a place where we can move the landscape in a more organized fashion? Because in terms of Black Lives Matter as a slogan, absolutely, I agree with it. But as an organization, there's some direction that's kind of missing that could be that second civil rights wave. But I think the organizational piece needs a little bit more. It needs a little bit more.
Sure. We have a good comment here about the struggle. My struggle has been without and within. When I talk about cleaning inside our house, I'm often attacked. Like the student and the young girl this week and the father involved, we definitely have some inside issues that are paramount in our self-healing. I think it's true. Hopefully my audio
Yeah, we talked about that too.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's twofold, right? I mean, if you look like 10 years ago, I know people don't like to talk about it, but Bill Cosby, right? That's what he was in his public speaking. He was saying, like, we need to do better. And even though he had his own issues, he was right. He was saying there's internal issues within our culture that we have to be accountable for, right? That's a good quote. Adults need to be adults.
Yes.
And even with these type of issues, we have some capabilities, some means, some options and opportunity to improve our situation. I think that, yes, like that quote about Rice and Dr. King is true to an extent, but since then, right, we have opportunity to do things different, right? That's not the only thing. We just look like, oh, let's ride, let's do this one thing. It's like, okay, but what message? But what now? You burnt down a Family Dollar neighborhood. Okay, now what? What's the actual what's the actionable step, right? Talk about that word.
Right.
What are we gonna do that's actually gonna have impact to our cause? And I think that's like I said, what's missing with some of the organizations and with some of the things that are trying to bubble up. But on the flip side, right, I think there's also organizations or just groups of people who have this collective mentality. What's the Kwanzaa word? Umanja. But we have this collective economic option that people are seeking, right? Supporting Black businesses, supporting Black restaurants, supporting each other, so that we they don't want to. Is my audio so choppy?
Yeah, I think we almost lost you. It's like you on life support. We almost lost you, man. But I know you're a big proponent of supporting Black businesses, Black banks, and I think it's just really and I agree with what you said too about the riots. And I think part of that is a double-edged sword for when we talk about riots and behaviors of people who riot. I think the unheard part that Dr. King was talking about is both being unheard by people from the dominant caste and both being unheard from people from within, like you were talking about, Anthony. And we talked about, Charles and I talked about that shooting of the girl this week. That wasn't a failure of the police. That was a failure of the entire system. And if you don't know, there's a young lady who was shot by police this week at 26 minutes after the George Floyd sentencing, or not sentencing, but the verdict. And in my mind, I was like, what were they doing outside? They should have been in the house watching the news. But they were outside fighting. And this young lady had a knife. And the police showed up to address the incident. None of the information is clear. And I think that's part of one of the issues now too. So the blessing and curse of camera footage and social media is that you kind of get you get somewhat of a firsthand of account, but all the information is not there. And so who called the police? Some people say that the girl did, and some people say something else, right? And so you don't have all the context, and so people are jumping to conclusions, and that's not a safe thing to do, because ultimately in that situation, that was a failure of the people who were supposed to be supporting that young lady. There were adults in that video. That's what first thing I saw was, why were adults allowing this young lady, these young people, to engage in this way? And so And unfortunately, the failure of the adults around her, again, that's my judgment, is what led to this young lady losing her life. Not the police, but that there were adults kind of watching them fail. That's and allowing them to fail. So it's crazy. And so there's just so much to unpack. You gotta bear with us on the other side here. Chuck will be back soon. But it was a failure of the family. It was a failure of the neighborhood, and the failure of every adult in there. The irony of that situation, if you did watch the video, and that's a whole nother topic too, watching these videos. But one of the issues that we saw was that the young man who was screaming, "You shot her. Oh my God, you shot her. You didn't have to shoot her," was the same person in the video kicking a woman that the girl had just knocked down. And so I'm like, what is happening, right? So this absolutely speaks to your comment, and I see the allegory here about cleaning inside our own house. However, that doesn't negate what happens, right? Because my wife and I were listening to this comedian this week that said America is a restaurant, that one of the things on the menu should be justice and equality. And some people are being served justice and equality, and it looked good. And some of us, we need to talk to a manager, right? Because what they serving, it just don't add up, right? And so, it's like you get your food and it look messed over. you get your plate of justice, you get your plate of equality, and you're like, what is this? This is not what I ordered. And then they start to complain, other people in the restaurant start complaining at you for asking for the same service that they got, asking for the same plate of equality and justice that they got. And so what you end up with is a plate full of injustice, a plate full of just inequality. And so how do we navigate that? I think it goes back to what you said. Yep, absolutely. It takes a collective work. It takes some collective action. It takes people educating themselves. It takes people being willing to, there you go. It takes people willing to just let go of this. I think we can go down this deep.
Yes, sir. Someone found my word. That's what I was talking about. That's
right.
There it is. Word.
But it's like we can go down this rabbit hole because a lot of this is like Willie Lynch. And if you haven't read the Willie Lynch letter, please do so. Because as much as people think that it's a work of fiction, it still doesn't negate the truth of what it's saying.
Right.
And that's the collective part that ends up tearing us apart. And so another example, and Charles, I won't need to play the clip, but the news anchor from Fox News. So two things I saw on Fox this week. One, after the Chauvin verdict, there was a black male anchor who's on Fox News. His name is Gianno Caldwell. He's a staunch conservative. He was a huge Trump supporter. He would present the black side of information for the Fox people, and the dominant cast people love him. I mean, they love this brother. And sometimes I watch him and I like the way
conservative,
man, they love him. If you look at his social media, they will be like, oh, we love you. You should run for office. We need more people like you, they say. And so this week, after the verdict came out, this brother posted, "Thank God justice was served."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the same people who loved him and thought that he should run for office and thought that he was such a great person turned on him. And I'm talking about his social media has been flooded with negative comments ever since that verdict.
Wow.
And it's sad, right? But it's an example of he, and then he went on news, and they did a segment. It was so bad they did a whole segment on it. And they were talking about it. It was like, because it was like there's blatant evidence, and he's like, I don't understand. We're supposed to be the party of law and order. Why would my people do like this? I expect this from the other side. I don't expect Republicans and conservatives to be acting like this. The evidence is clear. The facts are clear. And so, and I'm watching him struggle. What it looks like is struggle with his identity on live television, right? Here he is, a black conservative, wondering, perplexed, right? Why would the people of law and order not be okay with this? Why would they think that the trial was rigged, right? So they said the jury was rigged, and then they made comments like the jury was rigged. You only think like this because you black.
Right. I mean, it was just clear that they were being racist. I think,
yeah.
But I think that fringes on the idea that all conservatives are racist, or that black people can't be conservative. I think it exists in both, but there has to be an understanding of the reality of our current state. Right. There is inherent racism within our justice system. There is racism that exists, but there's this stance that no, it doesn't exist. No,
it doesn't. Yeah, like when people, and I think he was one of those people that was kind of like, racism doesn't exist, right? I don't, we've come so far as a country, and everybody has the same opportunities because he's a person that's on Fox, right? So he's taking his situation. Another phrase we talked about today. He's taking his perspective and applying it to everybody.
Sure, and I think perspective is what's been changing and altering. I think within this past year, right? Because there's all these different levels. There's people who think automatically Trump is the most racist thing ever and is terrible, and all Republicans and conservatives are racist. And then you have people like Candace Owens. I just saw in the comments where it's like, no, racism is real. Black people, they just need to do better. Da 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 da. Right? There's these two extremes that are happening, and that's what I think gets overshadowed by the actual fight that we need to be fighting. It's not this us versus them from a conservative standpoint. It's this or conservative Democrat.
Right.
I think it's more about what is on the books, what is on the laws. Like you're saying, these things that are being passed, right? Because then you have Republicans that are like, no, this was blatant, racism. This was wrong, and there are within both parties calling it out, but we get caught up in this political game, right?
And I think that's the issue. I think we've allowed politics to become this other thing of division for us,
right? And a moral compass for us, right? It's like, oh, you choose Democrat. Right. I mean, it's like it's Joe Budden's confidence level so high that says, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black.
You mean Joe Biden?
Joe Biden, yeah.
I was like, Joe Budden said that?
Joe Biden, sorry. Not Joe Budden, Joe Biden. But and I think that's the part of the issue, like you said, is it's being politicized, and we're not getting the things we need for our community.
And here's my soapbox. This is why everybody should be independent.
It's tough, man. It's tough. But I think kind of going back to this idea of what we can do, what is our action, and coming from the Christian perspective, right? Mm-hmm. There's been this history of injustice within the Christian church as well, and I'm talking at first to Christians, right? the Christians, were martyrs. They were abused. They were beaten. Right, Jesus died on the cross at the hands of Jews and Romans, and there's this history within the church of us being oppressed as Christians. And there's this history also within the church of us, standing up for what was right, and be it through ministry and through protest. Right, we have the example of of Paul, right, when he heals the girl. D. Rich was talking about that actually on our last one of our episodes. Go check that out. But there's this there are these examples in the Bible where we are called to act, right. And even in Jesus' ministry, although he didn't, I think, directly try to do protests against the Roman government, his way of solving the issue was reaching out to everyone and showing them, no, this is the kingdom of God. This is what Christianity looks like. This is what life's supposed to be like. And his ministry penetrated throughout all the different cultures of the time, right? I think that's what Christianity is called to do. Is like, he saw the racism, he saw the oppression, but his message penetrated past all that through love so much that the centurion believed, right, in him, right? And he was a Roman, right? But he had so much faith in Jesus that even with what was going on at the time, he still knew that, no, there's something about this man. And I think that's what we're supposed to be leading, is that there's something about these Christians that despite all this, that they're still preaching love, that they're still helping, that they're still standing up for those who are oppressed. And, I think in the comments section, we see that, the comment, Jesus had a plan. He did more than just talk. Paul was jailed for his actions, right? There was an actionable thing that happened, and not just, let's go on social media, let's protest, right?
Yeah, and I think and I think that's one of the things, if we, especially when you listen to the shows, when we have people like D. Rich and Victor on, Pastor Bartley, and is that this idea that if we were truly going to be like Jesus, and to truly carry our crosses, then the things that he and Paul did were things that were radical, right? And so the radical in the sense that, and I think this is where you and I disagreed about, like, if Jesus was here today, would he be protesting? I think that's a to say no.
That's a good question to everyone in that
is
watching.
Right. That is like, if
what would Jesus? Remember how saying,
what would Jesus do?
What would Jesus do?
What would Jesus do? I think, which is interesting, to say yes or no means to put Jesus in some kind of box, right? And so if you say no, you have to think. You mean to tell me after someone died brutally that Jesus would not be at the front of a march saying, that everyone deserves love and life, right? So like, that message, to say that everyone deserves it, is a political statement, especially when you think of the context. Like, Jesus didn't have to march and protest to go find stuff in his day, because they were under oppression and occupation. So everywhere he went, someone was, and then the Jewish people had the nerve to try to oppress people on top of that. When you think about, like, that conversation he had with the lady who wanted her child healed, right? Like, his disciples was like, ugh, why are you talking to her?
Right. There was like, racism.
Get out of her. And so Jesus used that lesson of her saying, was a statement. He was like, should I give
dogs have crumbs?
Yeah. And so she said the dogs will eat the scraps, right? And so that message that she said was a lesson to his disciples who were willing to oppress her. Right. And so in this moment, I think, again, from my perspective, Jesus, this question, would Jesus be for social justice? And I think the word social justice has been twisted a lot to mean a lot to a lot of people. But when you think about social justice in the true sense of the word, it means essentially that people deserve what they deserve without having to fight for it.
Right. And I think, to finish answer your question is like, yes, Jesus would be in the march, but that wouldn't be, just it, right? It's just like
Yeah.
Jesus didn't just preach, right? He didn't just go do sermons, right? He was out in the community. He healed people. He raised them from the dead. He fed
Oh,
them.
be careful, Chuck.
He did, right? And he did all of that. And the that same mindset has to be embedded within us, right? It's not just enough to just protest. It's not just enough to just do one thing, right? It's a this plethora of options that we have available and that we should be seeking to do. And I've seen in the comments, we shouldn't be following these
We
these
shouldn't.
parties, right?
We
They're
should.
and Brother Riley was breaking down the history of how the Democrats at the time were the ones, oppressing people. Then it switched to the Republicans, and it's like they're all one and the same. They both have this history of oppression, and it's just changing. Well, I had a friend back in college that said Democrats are just calorie-free Republicans. Like it's
Without the fat.
right, about the fact that it's one and the same, and we can't
It's
look.
all power, right? It's all
Right.
about, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't vote, but it means that you should, actively put thoughts into the things that you're voting on, right? You should, I think we had read some of Ellen White's statements on voting and what that should look like, right? It's become this almost entertainment like thing where people talk about it openly and look at how much TV ratings they get from it, right?
Right.
That so that alone should tell you like y'all doing something else.
Right. It's more about the action. That's what we're saying, about, not just limiting ourselves, right? We limit. I think in general, we have this limited mindset where it's like, we can only do one thing. We can only
Yep.
protest. We can only,
Yep.
pray
But
for people. It's like, you
back
can
to
do
your
both. Just like we were talking about with the family that just had the fire. And I'm purposely publishing them again because they need donations. They need you guys' help. They need people to support. But we can pray for them, but we can also help them. You
Yep.
have an extra dollar, you have an extra pair of shoes, you have that extra pair of clothes that you know you're not wearing. Go ahead and bless somebody with that.
Absolutely. I think you made a really good point too. And so that like Jesus didn't just preach. And even if you just say that, right? And if the church is supposed to be a reflection of Christ, our churches now, like again, going back to like our conversation with Victor from last week, our churches now have become these places that where people just go to hear somebody preach.
Yeah, it's a club.
Right. And so it's right. It's a social club. And so it's no different than the political parties in a lot of sense, right? It's a lot of rhetoric, right? We want your money, we want your donations. And so, and again, here's my other soapbox. Like the church, there's not enough action taking place. Like you look at like you said, the donation for the Sumter family. There's no way in the world, like as I'm trying to explain tithing to my children, that I can in good faith support the current system with this is world church donation process, right? It doesn't add up when you have these families and then people will be like, oh well, that's what your offering is supposed to go to them.
Mm-hmm.
What like what?
Well,
as long as we get our cut,
I think there we can do a whole show maybe on that. Maybe
I want to. That's what I was going with.
Some experts to talk about it, but I think there's a personal responsibility for each of us to do, what we believe is best with our money and giving to not just the church, but to those in need. And, I think sometimes we also, again, limit ourselves. We're like, well, my tithe and offerings, that's what I do for charity. And it's like, but you still got another 90%, hopefully your finances are well enough that you can give more than just 15% or 10% or whatever the number is to help those in need. But I think, this example of what's been going on in our society, this example of, what's happening just locally, there's a need for us to be actionable, right? There was the comment early: faith requires action. Faith without works is dead, right? And we can put that link up there again.
Yep.
You have that, Pernell?
I got it.
Yep. Definitely, definitely give, definitely support that family. And that's just such a tremendous loss. Again, the mother, the wife of the family died, and they lost everything on top of that. So,
and I think ultimately that's kind of what gets us back to like this kind of action, right? Like these are the things that truly matter. That when someone is suffering and someone, what does the church do? And again, when I say church, I have shifted my own thinking away from the building. The building is a social club. The church, I saw like a meme this week that was like the church is here, 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 and it's like arrows pointing to people walking down the street, at the store. Like that's where the church is. That's where it should be. And I think people need to be reminded that if you're watching right now, you are the church. And so this idea of, well, what can the church do? Well, we, the church, can reach out to people in need and support people. I'm so glad that there was some initiative to support this family who has lost. The thing that I thought, after I donated, right, was, man, this man had to create his own. I hope that wasn't him, but it looks like he had to create his own GoFundMe for his family. And I was like, I just thought, man, that was a missed opportunity. I went to the Maywood Church in Chicago when I was in grad school. And if there was a shooting in that neighborhood, what I loved about that church was that we would get together. And granted, not everybody has to do it, but there was a large portion of people from that church would get together and we would march through that neighborhood and pray with the family that lost and make sure that they had food and make sure that, and so it's like, but I don't see a lot of that happening in a lot of these churches. And I think a lot of,
that's a good question. What did we do before?
What did we do? We did. I think we did. I would like to hope that churches reached out to families and did something.
Well, when I was a kid, there was a Dorcas Fund, right? Like it was like a little mini Goodwill inside of each church, and you could give people, shoes. This family's 9.5 shoes for the daughter, twice like 12 shoes, 9 shoes, and it was like a little mini mall, right? That you could go in the back of the church, and people would give, and then other people would come in and take as they needed. But we don't. The church isn't open 24/7. You gotta make it right. You gotta call in advance. People don't answer the phone.
Yeah, and I think it just got diluted over time, right? And then it got diluted to thoughts and prayers.
Well, not just thoughts and prayers. It became inconvenient, right? Oh, I gotta go to the church to drop this off, and I gotta make arrangements to drop this off, and I gotta do. You know what? I'm just gonna give money. But then people aren't giving money to the Dorcas Fund. People aren't. There's not a dedicated, like, if some churches have it. Let me say that, but not a lot of churches are still doing that, where they're earmarking, okay, this much we're gonna have as an emergency fund for their community or those, within our church. We don't always do that, and it becomes like what Eric's saying. It's a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of debates, and it's like, well, can we just help this person out? It's like, wait a minute, we gotta take it to the board. We gotta do this. We gotta do that.
Well, I don't know about that, man. He said. We don't need the board's approval. Listen, see the need, fulfill a need as an individual, as you, as a church person. Yes. But I've definitely been a part of some conversations where we tried to do some things in the community and it just became, like you said, initially a bunch of meetings. And so, whereas as an individual, I might be able to do some things, but to serve a community, it does take like an institution. It does take a collective body. It does take a group of people. And can I go to a neighborhood and say, yeah, I'm going to do A, B, and C. But if the neighborhood has 50 children who are in need, and I am the only person trying to do something, then I'm going to run out of gas. And, or, I'm going to burn myself out, or, it just doesn't work that way. Right. And so
I still think it starts with the individual. I think
it does.
you can still do it. You don't have to wait, right? It's like it's like what Penny. I remember Penny told me like this is I don't know how many years ago, but he was like we're talking about difficulties in marriage, and it's like you see something dirty, you don't like it, clean it up. Don't just like complain to your spouse like why didn't you do that? It's like you do something. And it's like I think sometimes we get into the complaint mentality. The church isn't doing anything. The church. They're not doing it. I got to go through all these steps. And it's like, yeah, there's issues in the church, but you as an individual can call other people, hey, I want to help this person out, right? And I think we've done that too, where it's like we didn't go through all these, chains of commands. All we did was call up 5 other people. Hey, let's donate to this particular person. They need help. There's ways, right? You have what your network is your net worth, right? you can go out on your own and do stuff, and that should help to inspire other people within the church and say, hey, why don't we do this on a bigger scale? You were able to raise $1,000, with you and your friends. Let's match that. Let's pick up, a donation to double that. And it's like God will multiply, right?
I like that.
Yeah, if it's put on your heart, then you can lead the change. That's right, and that's what we're talking about with all the things that happened with George Floyd, with Dante. Right, there's things that we can do to lead the change.
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of the thing is, I think we run into this. I think we run into like a cycle, right? And I definitely want to say that I am definitely a person who is willing to kind of put my money where my mouth is.
Right. You read my mind because I'm like, maybe we need to start Saturday morning show donation.
And that's exactly where I was going. That's one of the things that I was going to save that for the end to say, like, we're going to, because I also thought at one point, I think it's easy to get discouraged sometimes too, because I think to say that, like, kind of say like, oh, you get it started and God will do the rest and you'll motivate other people. I mean, that's a very broad generalization. And you might have I think about like the community garden thing that we did at the church, or tried to do at our church. And they talked it to death, literally. Right. And guess what? I was interested in it. I'm not a gardener. I don't do all this other stuff. And so like, it was discouraging to sit in a room to hear all these people talk about reasons why not to do something. And so to be completely honest, like I was like, well, I tried. That's right. I was like, look, I tried. And it was, and so I think that does happen on a larger scale to a lot of people, and it's easy to get discouraged. And absolutely what we want to do is provide a space of encouragement, that yes, these are things that we can do. These are things that we're willing to talk about, willing to support, and also take back to our church, right? And if the building won't listen, then we'll take it to the people who will. And I think that through doing stuff like that, that's how you do make smaller changes in some people, and kind of bring on some people who might not have thought about it before.
Rochelle said that was discouraging, and I can understand that, but I think it's just calling out the realities, right? That in our society, just like with what happened to George Floyd, like that's discouraging. Like to see someone get killed by people who are supposed to protect them. But I think I was reading a scripture today in Jeremiah, and I think it's a good segue into that. And it's a scripture of let me see if I can bring it up, but. It's very related to what we were talking about today on this show. Let's see.
I'm telling you, man, why you pulling it up? It's just so much to unpack.
Right.
Like it's kind of like once you start, it's kind of like a rabbit hole with tunnels that go everywhere. You like, you got issues with police, and I think the other part of this is as you're transitioning to. There is room for criticism. And I think criticism, if done right, can bring about accountability. And so, when we're talking about the church, I think those criticisms are valid. And I think when we try to say, I've been in situations where people get defensive about it. You can't get defensive about somebody else's experience, right? And I think that's the same thing that happens when we talk about policing and racism, right? It's my experience, and we should just listen, hear the person out, and then offer solutions, right? All right, well, I've heard what you said. You've experienced this. Well, what can we do to help? Right? What can we do differently?
Right.
Because that's how we essentially take the position of as our my Bible study with my kids yesterday. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the next step, right? It's like you said, it's not just criticizing. There's action behind it on both sides, right? It's action from me as an individual, and then it's action collectively as a church. And the collectively as a church might take more steps, but there's an end goal in mind. There's an end plan, right? Jesus didn't immediately start his work of ministry. Right? It took time to do the great things that he did. And I think the church in the same way, it may take some time, but let's get there. Let's actually start doing. But the devotion that I had this morning, it was in Jeremiah, and it starts with saying, Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Right. And I was like, man, that's tragic. But then it goes on to say, for your and they will return from the land of their enemy. There is hope for your future. And that's what stuck on me, that there's hope for our future. Despite how things may be, despite the unspeakable pains that we're experiencing, despite the tragedies that are happening, despite the corruption that is happening, right? If you look at what Jeremiah was speaking to that time, they're about to go into exile, right? They're about to become captive by the Babylonians. They've experienced, all types of corruption with bad kings. They're in the midst of probably like their peak, time period. And God's saying, you're about to go through some even rough times, right? But there's hope. There's hope for the future. And that's what we want to leave with. That's our line, right? Don't fear the bad news, right?
No, absolutely.
there's
Absolutely. And I think it's amazing. I think that the other part of it too is, and not so much the criticism, but it's the reality of like, these people who should be full of hope, right? We have like the love of Jesus Christ.
You missed it. We have this hope, man. That's a hymn, baby. That's have this hope. Come on now. That's
exactly.
I thought that's
and
what
it's like, and it's kind of like we have, but again, it's like, but despite the fact, and that's what I put in the post, right? Right. We have this hope, but we've been put in the position for so long that we are now still hopeless, but still calling out for this hope that we know exists. And so, in my mind, I think like broad, big picture, like organization stuff. And I'm like, could you imagine if all of Christianity did what it was supposed to do and just leaned into Jesus?
It's tough, man. It's tough because we're sinful people. I mean, that's the struggle, right?
Like,
we have an enemy out here that's using anything and everything to keep us from God. And that's inside the church, and that's outside the church. That's with these officers of the law abusing people. That's with these churches that have their own issues, own variants of abuses, and own misuses of money. And it's a struggle.
But I think it's the same thing. Even when you look at like these protests, the protests that turned to riots, these police killings, the acts of injustice that happens with all these systems. It goes back to what you just said, right? The devil, it will use any and everything to discourage us and cause us to believe that there is no hope, right? And it is so it's such an easy trap to fall into, especially when you see it so much, when it's so prevalent. But it's the reminder is always there, right? And it's like that is why Jesus said, you know, the two greatest things that you can do is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself.
And then he went even further, right? To love your neighbor as you love me, right? Because we don't love you, we don't love ourselves.
Right. Because
That's
sometimes we don't love ourselves. And so it's kind of like, wow, like could you imagine like the possibility that could exist, right? When you think about it, like look at how much division that we have that's used to keep us apart, right? We have political division, we have racial division, we have, I mean, we got states that go against each other. We have, you know, in religion, you have denominations that keep us divided. Then within denominations, you got conferences that keep us divided. You got all this stuff, and you're like, what in the world? And if only the Christian would be like Christ, right? Like Gandhi said, I love your Christ, but not your Christians.
right, right. And it's and even Gandhi had his issues, right? He was racist too. If you
Yep.
look back at some of his stuff.
Yep. But he recognized the hope.
But and you know that's the I think what we want to end the show on is this hope that despite what's going on, despite us not knowing what they're going to sentence Derek to,
Yep.
we have hope that you know there's more to this, even within this life, right? We have, of course, the greatest hope when Jesus comes back, when all will be rectified and all will be put back, and true justice will be served. But even within this time frame, we have opportunities to help give justice, to help relieve those in need. That's right. What the world needs now is love. See, we need it. We need to get him on the show to sing, man.
Telling you, right? If we ever needed the Lord before,
You look like
you need him now.
You look like a member
Can't hit the note.
Right.
Can't hit the
You look
note.
like a Take Six backup singer over there.
Can't hit the note. But yeah, it's just so much. Like, so yeah, I mean, I think I really do think about questions like that. Like, man, if Jesus stepped back on the scene, I think it would be just like it was when he rose, right? People wouldn't believe it would be him. He'd go to all these people who are supposed to be these religious leaders, and they'd be like, "You ain't Jesus."
Well, yeah, and that's what and that's that's what I want to segue into. One thing that I think will be good to end the show on a good fun note. One thing that I've been enjoying, just like Purnell likes to plug the Amplified Bible. Go ahead and get that Bible.
Get that Amplified Bible brought to you by.
I like to plug this new show that I found that I believe shows Jesus in a different light, and that's the Chosen TV series. It's an independent Christian film or Christian TV show. What's that?
Any black people on there?
Yes, actually. And Jesus
he
ain't blue-eyed.
Do they have speaking roles?
Some of them do. I haven't made it through the whole series, but they have a variety of people cast, I think, throughout the show. Like I've seen Asian people, I've seen black people. Even the guy playing Jesus isn't like this blonde-haired, straight, blue-eyed type fellow. Yeah.
Jesus got some color?
Yeah, man, he definitely got some color, and it's a good show and how they're weaving in everyone's story. So if you have time, you're looking for something.
Well, guess what? It's Sabbath, and we doing all this stuff digitally, so you got time.
Exactly.
Watch it, and while you're watching that, make sure you go check out that link to help out the Sumter family.
That's right. We can show that link again too. It's in the comments. Definitely support those that family. Though they're definitely in need. And we want to leave an action to do, and that is our call to action is to
absolutely. And so you can look forward to us talking about local initiatives. If there's an initiative that you know of that you think hit us up social media, and we'll plug it. We will plug it and post it and talk about it, and we want to be. We want to actually do some ministry, right? Like I think it's good to talk, but you have to have some action, right? And I'm that's definitely my shift for my own perspective of Christianity is to shift and make sure that there's a lot more action. And I won't be dependent on the building to act on my behalf. And so one of the things we'll do stuff, and then we'll hopefully include you all, and hopefully you'll also support some of those initiatives. But guess what? If you don't, Jesus with us. Got Jesus on my back, son.
That's right. So we appreciate y'all rocking with us today, and we hope that we left you with some reason not to fear the bad news.
Absolutely. Keep your heart, mind, focus on the Lord.
That's right. And always trusting God.
Always, man.
So with that being said,
ever needed the Lord before, we sure do need him now. We sure do need
sing us out
him
for
now.
now.
Oh Lord, sure do need him now. If you ever need, come on, everybody, Lord before, we sure do
thank you
need
for
him
watching.
now.
We definitely appreciate it.
Need him
For now,
every
singing us out.
day and
Go back and
every
watch our old episodes. Definitely check out Victor's episode, Victor Circle, D. Rich's episode, and definitely please enjoy your day. Definitely take what we said seriously, and please give to the Sumter family. We are two Christian brothers, and we are out.